This is why I'm not a television person. First off, just that was really remarkable. It was just like taking a warm bath in my life, and yes, I will show the award, which will live in on my bookshelves in Los Angeles. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. So now I'll speak. I'm honored. Thank you. At a time when we're all working to win back the trust of the people, after 4 years of relentless attack by a president, it is truly meaningful to me to receive an award in the name of a journalist known for holding the public's trust. It also means a lot to get this from a school that so believes deeply in the hands-on practice of journalism. I'd like to thank Dean Gilger, Provost Searle, and Dean Gilger also happens to be, as she said, one of my former Times Picayune colleagues. I also thank all of my friends who, without my knowing it, gave video tributes. It was in fact touching. I love journalism in all of its forms, but I love reporting the most. Some of the greatest fun and the most profound moments of my life have taken place with a notebook in my hand. In fact, that is what I would like to talk about today. My theory, secretly shared by many editors I know and respect, is that one of the major crises in our profession is the erosion of the primacy of reporting. There are other issues, of course. It is vital that we diversify our newsrooms, and I will touch on that. Journalism is being reinvented now, and that is exciting, quite frankly. And I get the current debate about objectivity. My views of that will become clear in my remarks as well. But there is not enough talk about the beauty of open-minded and empathetic reporting, and the fear that its value will fade in an era where hot takes, quick analysis, and riffs are held in such high esteem, and where many journalists seem to have no use for the quotation marks on their keyboards, and where the capital I on those same keyboards seem worn. The dramatic drop in newsroom jobs has been widely discussed, particularly in local news, but it's worth restating, if for nothing more than the shock value. Between 2008 and 2019, newsroom employment in the United States declined by 23%. At least one study asserted that newsrooms cut another 11,000 jobs in the first half of 2020. Everyone agrees the decline is worsening. The pandemic has gutted the industries that are most likely to advertise. And the cuts are not only taking place at traditional news organizations. The struggles of newer institutions like the Huffington Post are further evidence of a crisis that will only continue. This is a profound and serious threat to our democracy. But I actually think that that's only part of the story. There's also the simple fact that news organizations have many more crafts than ever before, and most of them don't involve reporting. The product organizations and audience editors who have joined newsrooms in recent years are all journalists, important journalists. They are vital to our futures. They save the New York Times and other American institutions. In fact, we need more journalists taking on those roles. But these changes also mean that the average newsroom has even fewer reporters than their numbers show. Fewer people on the ground, fewer people making phone calls, fewer banging on doors, fewer with empty notebooks desperate for explanations and answers. So the focus of my talk today is why reporting matters, why it should be restored to the center, how honorable and wonderful it is at its best. Because I believe so much in reporting, this is actually a reported speech. I've spent the past couple of weeks talking to reporters and editors at the Times, BuzzFeed, and the Washington Post, collecting their stories, their surprises, their triumphs, and their lessons. I asked them to join me in reveling in reporting by telling me how they've been surprised, how they've had their premises tossed aside, or had conventional wisdom proven silly. even how they chased a tip or a feeling in the gut. Prove to me, I ask them, that reporting is as valuable as I believe. Given that I don't get to do much reporting myself, except for internal memos, this was a lot of fun. As Jason DeParle, my former Times-Picayune colleague, who is now the Times' great chronicler of poverty in America, put it to me, quote, "The great lesson of reporting is that the world is almost always more complicated and unlikely than it seems while sitting at your desk." I asked Jason what had surprised him in a career in which he has written about poverty and deprivation around the globe. He recalled a time in the early 1980s when he covered the death penalty for the Times-Picayune. One day he drove deep into Cajun country to interview a man named Godfrey Bork, whose teenage son had been murdered by a man who was about to be executed. Bork wanted his son's killer to die. Jason didn't believe in the death penalty. He expected to find a bitter, angry man holding fast to a barbarian view. He had caricatured Bork and surmised how hardened and vengeful he would be. Jason got a surprise. He found a devout Catholic who was raising an adopted disabled boy whom he called God's special angel. Quote, "Beyond whatever I wrote for that piece, the encounter made me listen harder and more fully to avoid stereotyping." Jason said, "Sometimes you notice stuff in the field that doesn't make it into reporting, but still alters your perspective in an important way and makes you rethink your broader line of coverage." Years later, Jason learned a lesson about the generosity of the people he was covering, their humanity. Lessons you can't learn from your desk. For a story about people so poor they don't even have the fees to file for bankruptcy, Jason spent a chunk of time sitting in a neat trailer with a family in Morganton, North Carolina. Each of the 3 children had a genetic disease. Their bikes had long been repossessed. These people had nothing. But as Jason rose to leave, the father rummaged through a drawer and uncovered a pile of KFC coupons. He handed them to Jason, saying they were worthless to his family because they couldn't afford fast food. He insisted Jason take them. When Jason offered a few bucks to the children, so moved by the experience, the Bork family refused and told him he might need the money for gas. Melissa Segura of BuzzFeed, who won a Pope for her series on Chicago's broken justice system, learned the lesson of just leaving the office and showing up in person. She sat in the living room of a woman she believed had been close to a bad cop she was profiling. She showed the woman a picture of the officer. The woman stared for a second, then said she wished she could help, but she didn't know the man. Just then, a young girl in pigtails ran into the room, saw the photos in Melissa's hands, and shouted happily, "Grandpa!" Melissa turned to the woman and gently asked if she would like to start all over again. For the same story, Ms. Segura sat in the Cook County Clerk's office, where I have spent many hours myself, reading through more than 50 murder files. It was a Friday afternoon before a holiday weekend. Her eyes were blurry. She had read every file when one she felt was tangential turned up. Exhausted, but with the reporter's urge to know everything, she opened that one too, and found that the police officer's confidential personal file had accidentally been placed into it. My point is that great reporters out in the world looking for stories make their own luck. Jodi Kantor, part of the New York Times team that won the Pulitzer Prize for the stories about Harvey Weinstein's abuse, learned not to assume who the good guys and the bad guys are in any story. David Bowie's The Super Lawyer, the righteous slayer of dragons, turned out to be one of Weinstein's biggest protectors. Lisa Bloom, who had reached out to Jodi and her partner early on, portraying herself as an avid feminist, was actually being paid to smear the women who accused Mr. Weinstein. Jodi and other Times reporters learned another lesson. You have to keep going back, keep showing up, keep asking. The Weinstein story had its roots in 2005, when Bill O'Reilly was accused of harassment by a woman at Fox News. It stayed with me all those years. What had happened to that case? It was a different era, and O'Reilly had been able to dismiss it on his show. And he got away with it until Mike Schmidt and Emily Steele went back and started reporting on O'Reilly's harassment of women at Fox. This opened up the rich story of Fox's history of sexual misconduct, which in turn led to O'Reilly's firing and eventually to the editors Rebecca Corbett and Matt Purdy, two of the greats, creating the team that broke the Weinstein story. Matt also ran the reporting that led to the most important disclosures about Donald Trump's finances, including his tax returns. The story was a masterclass in how reporters make their own luck by scouring courthouses, databases, and sources. Cameron Barr, the acting editor of the Washington Post, told me his paper learned the value of continuing to report and report in the face of denials when they set out to prove the National Security Advisor, Michael Flynn, had secretly discussed sanctions against Russia with the country's ambassador. This was one of the big gets of the early Trump era. Flynn strongly denied it. The Post did more reporting and came back. This time, Flynn said he couldn't remember. Then they did more and came back. This time, he asked if he could just remove his denial from their story. Sometimes trust in reporting comes from such relentless pursuit of the truth that the subject has to admit you're right. My last two examples come from the events of last year, when American cities were the scenes of protests following the deaths of Black men in police custody. The first is John Eligo's story about the days after the death of George Floyd, when the cry of defund the police was in the air. On social media, the debate was raging. Everyone was certain of their position. Certainty, by the way, is one of the enemies of great reporting. John, meanwhile, stood on a street corner in the predominantly Black north side of Minneapolis, where one scene, one discussion showed the true complexity of the issue. He wandered up to a group of people in fierce debate. Some thought there should be community patrols, not police. Some wanted money diverted from police to social services. One woman wanted police in her neighborhood so they could stop cars from racing through at all hours. But she was also wary of police because they had falsely arrested her husband outside their own house. As John put it to me, if you only talk to experts or advocates, it is impossible to get the nuance and even the ambivalence of the debate. Finally, a story from Emmanuel Felton, a BuzzFeed reporter, relayed to me by Mark Schoofs, his terrific editor. Emmanuel wrote one of the most compelling pieces after rioters stormed the Capitol. He wanted to examine the way the Capitol Police handled the riot. With much evidence, Black Lives Matter supporters has said the police handled the January 6th storming of the Capitol with kid gloves, as opposed to the way they policed American cities last year. The police, of course, denied that. Emmanuel wanted to get past the easy debate and come up with a different take, perhaps some sources who could offer an unassailable truth. So he talked to Black Capitol Police officers. Quote, I felt this surge of excitement when I started calling the Black officers, Emmanuel said. What side of the line would they fall on? Would they side with Black activists or their police departments? This is the kind of reporting I love to do, he said, when I have no idea what a person is about to tell me. It is in these stories that we find nuance, and often people who have thought long and hard about these issues, but who haven't had a reporter pick up the phone to them yet. As it turned out, the Black officers did feel the Capitol rioters got off easy. When BLM protested, there was an all-hands-on-deck order. Not so for the Capitol protest. But Emmanuel also entered a world he'd never been in before, one with a rich and different view of policing in America. So what's the lesson of all these stories? Besides the fact that there's some amazing reporting going on in America, despite budget cuts, crises of trust, relentless attacks on the media. Every one of these reporters went in with an open mind and an open notebook. It is remarkable how many of them, unbidden, used the word nuance. They were not objective. No one is. Jason DeParle went in with his own view of the death penalty 30 years ago. I oversee coverage of law enforcement with a history of being a Black man from the South, whose father told him to always slow down when you see a police car and walk, never run. But they were open-minded. They went in looking for reasons to doubt their own conclusions. Each of them was open to having their assumptions proven wrong. To my mind, that is a good one-line definition of independence and fairness. A great reporter is always open to being proven wrong. At its best, journalism is the process we have built to come as close to the truth as humanly possible. We should be open to the challenges of that process. We should be humble about its limitations. We should learn that each generation will want to question it. One of my favorite quotations that I referred to earlier is from Bill Kovach, former DC bureau chief of the Times and editor of the Atlanta Constitution. Every generation invents its own journalism, he says. But with all those journalists I spoke to, different ages and different points of view, some from digital publications, some from traditional papers like the Times, some Black, some white, what they all had in common is they went out into the world, got away from their computers and social media. They were open-minded and empathetic. They tested their beliefs. Great journalism, as I said, is skeptical of absolute certainty. Of course, I don't mean they're skeptical of the existence of racism or poverty. And of course, there is right and wrong in the world, and we should call those out when we see them. What I mean is that these reporters did not see themselves as cheerleaders for anyone, and that even the best ideas are worthy of interrogation. I'd like to thank the reporters and editors who spoke to me for this. As you can tell from the quotes, they were eloquent and excited to talk about their craft. Maybe we don't talk about it enough. And thank you for this award. My life in journalism has been a full one. It is odd that I became editor of the New York Times, given that as a kid, I'd never heard of the New York Times. Its mission inspires me every day, and the Ox-Sulzberger family, which has owned it unselfishly, is a national treasure. In fact, I accept this on behalf of them and all the editors and reporters of the Times and all the editors and reporters in Atlanta, Denver, and everywhere who are covering tragedies right now. I met my wife, Dylan, in the newsroom, and the life I have now would have been impossible without her. I made lasting friends, many of whom are here today. The joyous smile you saw on my face in those videos represents the truth. This life is fulfilling. For the students in the audience, I promise you, if you choose this life, you will have much more fun than anyone ever should. Thank you so much. Thank you.